This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
Welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Ronnie Nathan, and it is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. Be sure to join our Patreon, which gives you access to our moderated community chats, exclusive TPNR merch, and ad-free episodes. A lot of other benefits there. It's really our subscribers who help us keep these conversations going. So thank you. I really do appreciate those who are subscribing. Just go to patreon.com/politicsandreligion. That's patreon.com/politicsandreligion. And as always, it's really helpful if you take a minute to write a review of the program. Links to the Patreon and an easy way to write that review are all in our show notes. So it all helps so we can continue having great conversations like the one we're having today with a man who needs no introduction, my dear old dad, Ronnie Nathan. Pops, how you doing? And welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. It's been a while.
It has been a while. So longtime listeners might remember my dad, Ronnie's regular appearances on the show during our first year. I thought it might be nice to have him back to discuss, not much has been going on in the world or, actually there's been a lot going on. So I thought it'd be nice to get an old Jewish guy from Brooklyn's point of view on everything that's going on. But before we get into some specific topics and events, Dad, this isn't necessarily something we discussed before. I was thinking of who you grew up with over the grocery store on 17th Avenue in Bensonhurst. And I don't think anyone was particularly politically engaged. Were they? I was curious, like how you initially got interested in politics in the first place.
Wow. Well, my family was always a Democratic family. I mean,
they were FDR Democrats, right?
FDR Democrats, Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey Democrats, Adlai Stevenson Democrats. We were working class people. We had a family grocery store. My mother was an immigrant who came over in 1921. The newspaper my father read was the New York Post, which back then was a very liberal newspaper with columnists like Max Lerner. I forgot his name. A guy who really had a big influence on me. I can't remember his name now. It'll come to me in a few minutes. But anyway, we were solid. It was a solid Democratic family. But I didn't get engaged in politics actively until I got into high school, when I started to think about politics seriously. Kennedy was elected president. Folk music as an alternative to rock and roll became very popular.
Was it William Leggett, Dad?
No. Oh gosh, I had it on the tip of my tongue. This guy wrote a couple of satirical books.
Sorry, I was just looking it up online. That's okay. We'll come up. Yeah.
And I think I mentioned this once before in one of the programs. I read Catch-22 as a ninth grader.
I didn't realize that came out that early. The Joseph Heller book, right?
Yes. I read it when I was I'm sure it was out by 1960, 61, because I read it when I was in ninth grade. And it suddenly dawned on me that even in the throes of a patriotic, righteous endeavor like World War II and fighting Nazis, a lot of bullshit happens.
Yeah.
Barry Goldwater started to come on the scene, and there were rumblings from the conservative right. They were taking over the Republican Party. And politics became a really big deal. And then Vietnam hit, and all the protests. And that's what really energized not just me, but an entire generation of people. Before the Kennedy assassination and before Vietnam, Boy Scouts, America, patriotism, that was all apple pie and baseball in America, and everything was great. After Vietnam and Kennedy's assassination, I started to question all of that stuff.
I guess that makes sense too, because you were 16 when Kennedy was shot.
I was just about, yeah, I was 16. You're right. I was a senior in high school at the time. So by the time I got to college, I was hard left. And in the background was all the civil rights struggles, which energized all of us and kind of defined for us the cultural battles that would dominate politics for the rest of my life.
So was part of what was defining your politics, seeing folks like, what's his name again? The senator from Arizona that kind of defined that part of the conservative movement, ran against Johnson in 64.
Barry Goldwater.
Barry Goldwater. So seeing, and were you deep enough into politics to understand what his positions were and defining yourself in opposition to him? Or was it, were there other figures, say, growing up, in the midst of the McCarthy hearings, for example, or maybe that was too early for you? So my question is, were you defining yourself in distinction from others like Goldwater, or was it more that you were drawn to an entire culture, including the early folk music scene, the early anti-Vietnam scene,
Civil rights scene?
Yeah, civil rights. 63 was a big year for the civil rights movement. Johnson's first year as president, and then his first year after the 64 election were big years. So those are very formative years for you. What was it that had a bigger impact, in opposition to or being drawn into, or a combination of both?
I never thought about it in those terms before, but now that you mention it, I was drawn into the culture. We dressed a certain way. We grew our hair long. We sang songs, went to certain concerts. We hung out together. Strangely enough, the American flag became a negative symbol for us because it was associated with Vietnam and the construction workers and all that stuff. And then when Robert Kennedy was assassinated and Nixon was elected, it had very much the same impact that the Trump election had in 2016.
So you felt that strongly against Nixon by that point?
Yes.
That's interesting, because Nixon wasn't Nixon until, like he had overwhelming support. I guess if RFK had lived, that would have been a very, very different election.
Nixon, when he was in the House of Representatives, was instrumental in the UAC committee, and he was instrumental in all this Hess and all of that stuff. So Nixon already came to politics with a very right-wing conservative pedigree, and he was a fellow traveler with McCarthy, to borrow one of their terms. I mean, he was on the communist hunt in the late 40s. That's how he made his bones politically. When he ran for Senate, he ran a very anti-Semitic campaign against Helen Kagan Douglas, who was Jewish. And so I already thought Nixon was poisoned by 1968.
So, okay, so I could go down this road for the next hour just talking about this, but there are some contemporary issues I'm curious about. You and I haven't talked about this. There's one line of attack that, listen, the show is about talking politics and religion without killing each other, but I've noticed there have been a couple of times where, frankly, I just lost my shit. And there's this one line of attack that Trump is still trotting out almost on a weekly basis. And I hear some people that I stay in touch with that are regurgitating it. And that is essentially, if you don't vote for Trump, you're a crappy Jew. Have you heard him say that, or others say that?
Absolutely.
And what is your, how number one, how do I process that? What's your reaction to it? But how can I process that more productively than me just wanting to punch somebody in the fucking throat?
I have friends, especially since I've become more religious in the past 10, 15 years, who are Trump supporters and who have that attitude. I've made a personal commitment. I'm not going to lose friendships over politics. So if I'm confronted with this issue, how can you vote against Trump when he is so good for Jews in Israel? I respond by giving them information about all the Nazis and neo-Nazis that Trump associates with. My feeling is that I really don't care what Trump does for Israel because he can't be trusted.
Right.
You know, he can't be trusted on any level whatsoever. So he may be for Israel and Netanyahu now, but if Netanyahu calls Biden to congratulate him from his election, now Netanyahu is an enemy.
Right.
He's running for president now, wants the Jewish vote, so now Netanyahu is his friend. I mean, in my personal life, I certainly wouldn't associate with someone who's so untrustworthy. Why would I trust Trump's allegiance to Judaism and Jews now? And when you put on top of that the fact that I'm really anti-Netanyahu.
Yeah.
I think Biden has done the best job any president could possibly do by giving Israel every material support it needs to pursue the war against Hamas, while at the same time doing the best he can to restrain Netanyahu.
You know, it's interesting. So our family in Israel, Sheila and Alan, who are closer to your generation, Jonathan and Dina, Laura, may she rest in peace, but Jonathan, Dina, my surviving cousins who are closer to my generation, I get the sense that there's a split among them about support for Netanyahu. But that's really reflective of Israeli citizens, that there's this assumption that, without thinking too much about it, that if you're against Netanyahu, you're against Israel, you're anti-Semitic, and that's just not the case. There's a great deal of do you have a sense of where our cousins are in terms of support for Netanyahu and how he's conducted the war?
I interact with Sheila. I talk to her about once a month. In fact, I should be calling her this week or next week. She's and Alan, I know, are very anti-Netanyahu. They go to the demonstrations every weekend to demonstrate against him. I don't interact with her children, maybe a little bit on Facebook, and I certainly don't interact with her grandchildren, so I don't know what their positions are, except through you.
Yeah.
What I do know is this. For the last 20 years, every time Netanyahu has been in power and there was a peace process put in place, that week, Netanyahu decided to expand settlements.
Oh.
Every single time. Every time Biden comes out, or a security advisor comes out and says that we're very close to a hostage ceasefire deal, all of a sudden, the defense of Israel requires Netanyahu to bomb Hezbollah or go into the east into the West Bank and raid terrorist headquarters and kill innocent people as collateral damage. Right. Every single time. It's hard for me to believe that this isn't a conscious program by Netanyahu to sabotage any possibility for peace. I think Netanyahu and Hamas need conflict.
War is good for business in a way.
Their reason for being is the conflict.
Right.
Peace can only lead. I mean, if the war ended tomorrow, Netanyahu would be out of a job and he'd probably be on trial for corruption.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Before we move on, I wanted to tell you about something else that's important. Money. Specifically your money. In all seriousness, I wanted to tell you about my advisor and my friend, George Meza. George runs Meza Wealth Management. And with George, it's not just about money. It's about helping us manage our present and plan for our future. And unlike a lot of other firms out there, George and I actually have a relationship. He knows me, he knows my family, and I know his wonderful family. I also know his firm and the incredible team he's put together, from his chief investment officer to some of the other great people in his office, like Jessica, their head of operations, that are always there to help me and with all aspects of our portfolio. You see, the thing is, I got a lot going on. I guess we all got a lot going on, and I don't have the time to watch our investments all day, every day. And even if I did, I don't have the experience and expertise that George's team collectively has. So we get the entire Mesa Wealth Management team, all their expertise and all their integrity. And again, it's based on George knowing me personally, knowing my goals, and even the kind of risk that's appropriate for me to take, which, by the way, could change from one season to the next. And they're on top of all of that. So if you want George Mesa and Mesa Wealth Management to be on your team, just visit their website, mesawealth.com. That's MEZA wealth.com, www.mesawealth.com. And that will also be in our show notes, so you can check that. And now, back to our show. Okay, so again, we already got off text here. I did want to talk about the election here and what's happened over the last couple months. So folks who've been listening might know that I happened to be in New York when the debate happened, the infamous now debate. And not only that, I happened to be at my parents' house in upstate New York. So I got I really should have been filming, there should have been a camera just placed facing us, me in your chair, you and mom on the couch, as we watched the debate, because there's an entire play that could be written just about how you were processing it, how mom was processing it. But so we had a long talk.
And how you were processing it.
I was pretty distraught, to be honest with you. But I was taking notes. So I do have some of those notes still. And but I think your initial assessment about 5 or 10 minutes in was pretty correct, which was, holy shit, he's going to fucking lose. I think those were your exact words. But the first question I wanted to start, because there's a lot that's happened at that time, since that time, when I've thought to myself, I wonder what my dad's thinking. I wonder what he's thinking, specifically because you daven 3 times a day. So you think about God a lot. As an observant Jew, thinking a lot about God, have you had suspicions or seen hints of God's hand at work in the events we've all witnessed here over the last couple months?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Which is typical Jewish
That's
answer.
A very Jewish answer, by the way.
And to explain the answer, I would ask a question, which is even more Jewish.
But then if you talk over
I'll
me.
relate to you a little vignette that happened after the debate. I don't remember the specifics, but the war in Gaza was going horribly with protests all over the country. And, it was, and it looked like there was no end in sight, still does. I wrote a couple of friends emails, and the only thing it said is, I can't believe God is letting this happen.
Mm-hmm.
Trump's going to win, and Jews are going to be labeled as genocidal bastards.
Yeah.
This is like a long, dark tunnel that I can't even imagine. And I went into a little depression.
That's interesting.
Which is a purely emotional response because, I came to religion I came to orthodoxy late in life. So when I read Torah, when I read the Chumash, which is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, I really do read it with 2 hats. On the one hand, I'm observant and I read it thinking of it as God's words. But then I also have all the secular training. I was in graduate school for history. I was an agnostic most of my life. And I know a little bit about academic biblical scholarship and the four writers or schools of writers of the Torah and all that stuff. So I resist seeing God's hand in any specific event in my life or in the public life, as well.
Are those, that's your secular impulses?
Yes.
Okay.
The other issue is that it's very interesting. There's a central principle in Orthodox Judaism, at least the Chabad variety of it. Everything comes out for the best. Everything God does is for the best. So now you look at something like the Holocaust and say, how the fuck is that possible?
Right.
Well, the answer always is, well, man doesn't fully understand God, so
Right.
we don't understand. And this isn't the end of the story. So it really is for the best. And I mean, if you look at it practically, there would be no Israel today if there was no Holocaust. I really believe that.
Interesting. Okay.
I was pretty depressed and pretty down on God. And 10 days later, everything changed.
Yeah. Yeah. 10 days. Not quite.
I think it was about 10 days.
It was, so Biden, are you talking about when Biden stepped down?
Yep.
So Biden stepped down, I want to say on the 21st of July. So it was about 3 weeks.
About 3 weeks. Okay.
Yeah, it was about 3 weeks. The time that I thought, if anything, that God has a mysterious way of working, it's when, so you could argue that the Republicans hit their stride, the campaign had it peaked sometime between July 13th and July 18th. July 13th is when the assassination attempt happened. I think most of us are glad that it didn't end. It didn't end with Trump being assassinated. Tragically, somebody was assassinated. That's a tragedy, but I can only imagine how that might have sparked, if he was in fact killed, how that might have sparked something. Maybe not.
Awful.
It would have been awful,
America.
Right?
I've heard it for America.
I've heard it compared to the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand that sparked a lot of the events that led to World War I. Maybe that might not be a direct parallel, but history has a way of rhyming. Anyway, when I thought God's hand might have been involved was Biden seemed to be staying in long because it was 3 weeks. It was 3.5 weeks. And I thought the Republicans and the Trump campaign was peaking during the very time that Biden was still, at least publicly, stubbornly staying in. And then if you remember, he got hit with COVID. So
right.
I thought I don't know why, but I thought you might put 2 and 2 together and say, God is allowing for this to happen. He'll be fine, but he has to get knocked down a couple of pegs. And maybe this will, be the impetus for him stepping aside. So,
I'll tell you, Corey, that the most amazing thing is something that only the Republicans have hinted at, because one of the things that got me so depressed was that I thought Harris would be an even worse candidate than Biden based on the performance in
2019,
in the primaries in 2020.
Yeah.
And I think most people, including in the Democratic Party, didn't think Harris could be a viable candidate to beat Trump.
I wasn't as bearish as that, but I at the very least had my doubts. I mean, she didn't have a great record on the national stage. She had some moments, like in the Senate hearings, in certain Senate hearings, when you got to see the prosecutor, a great question asker. That's her at her best. She had a couple of moments where she had a good couple of lines in the debates in the summer of 2019, but mixed record. I had my doubts, and frankly, even seeing her here as a senator in California, where I started becoming a little bit more familiar with her, I wasn't anti Kamala Harris, but I certainly wasn't as as warm to the idea as somebody like Gretchen Whitmer or Josh Shapiro or some of the other top candidates that were beginning to emerge.
I thought she was too wedded to too many left-wing policies as a senator and as a campaigner in the primaries to have a chance against Trump. And and I think part of the depth of the depression was also the recognition that the Democrats didn't have any other alternative.
Harris?
They couldn't have picked anybody but Harris because she was the vice president, and anybody else would have completely alienated every minority voter in the country. And it would have been characterized as going around Harris because she's black or because she's minority or because whatever. And that was my feeling. My feeling was that Trump had this whole thing locked up in a landslide. And then all of a sudden, this new Harris emerged.
Yeah.
Which is great. I mean,
yeah.
I had an interesting conversation with somebody on Facebook, a reasonable guy, really bright guy, who put up a post about Harris flip-flopping on the wall. Okay.
On building a wall?
The wall, Trump's
yeah.
wall. She came out and said she's okay with the wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he characterized that as a flip-flop, and it was a criticism of her that she doesn't have values, and you can't trust her, and all this other stuff. And my response was, wow, I'm so happy she flip-flopped.
Yeah.
I hope she flip-flops
on some more issues.
A lot more on a whole lot of other issues.
Yeah.
And why? I said, because building a wall is not a core value. Border security and not treating people, even illegal aliens, in an inhumane way is a core value. Building a wall or not building a wall, a part of a wall, that's not a core value. She could flip-flop on that stuff all day long. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, the other, I was in a conversation last night, good buddies of mine who are clearly not fans of Kamala Harris. And to me, it's even more fundamental. It's, we have one candidate who, if she loses, she'll accept, she'll concede, and she'll participate in the peaceful transfer of power. If she wins, I fully expect to have a lot of disagreements on a policy by policy basis. We have another candidate who won't, if he loses, won't concede and won't participate in the peaceful transfer of power. To me, once we acknowledge that, which is we have a lot of basis for making that projection, we have no reason to talk about policy. That's the policy. That's the only conversation that matters. Is he going to participate in the peaceful transfer of power if he loses? Because if we can't say that, then no policy matters. Then if he wins, then what is then going to be prominent? What's going to be prominent are, if you want to talk about policies, it's the policies that he puts in place, starting with the First Amendment, that start with the freedoms that are articulated in the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of redress of grievances, let alone, the balance of establishment clause and freedom of expression of religion. But just press and assembly, he's explicitly talked about ways that his administration is going to undermine those. And the people that are most likely to be in key positions, whether it's his chief of staff or his AG, like Stephen Miller, like Kash Patel, they've explicitly said it out loud. They said, no, we're going to use the military. We're going to use the National Guard to suppress assemblies. We're going to suppress the process of redress of grievances. We're going to suppress journalists by arresting journalists who write things that we don't like, and let the legal system catch up with us. We'll be in the driver's seat. So let's just see what happens. And they're talking about it brazenly, openly. But I don't even care. Like, you want to talk about immigration? I don't care. You want to talk about foreign policy? I don't care. Most of it, frankly, from what I've heard, they're worse than hypothetical arguments. Ukraine, Putin never would have invaded Ukraine if Trump was in office. Hamas never would have attacked Israel if Trump. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. I don't care about any policy if we can't get past November 5th and if Trump loses, accepting the results of the election and participating in the peaceful transfer of power. Anyway, you got me. I didn't expect you to go there, but those are my thoughts. Policy? You want to talk policy? Okay, let's talk policy. I disagree with this, and this with Kamala. We can't talk policy with Trump because it's the foundation of our democratic process.
I have this theory that I floated by you maybe a week or two ago.
Okay.
I don't think policy matters in a presidential election.
Well,
I mean,
okay. So you tell me, yeah. Tell me why you say that.
Let me rephrase that. I don't think the outcome of a presidential election depends on policy at all.
Right.
Okay. Now, why? Number one, and it's particularly stark in this election. Real policy wonks don't like any policies that are put out in a campaign. Every campaign promise, every policy statement from a presidential candidate is just that. It's campaigning. And policy wonks take a look at everybody's policy and think they're all bad. That's number one. Number two, the average voter doesn't know much about policy.
Right.
The average voter, including probably you and me, when you come right down to it, is voting on two things: trust and security. I don't mean national security. I mean feeling secure in their lives, that things are going to be basically stable, predictable. I can handle this. And it's a completely emotional response. And I think Trump's rise in the political sphere is an example of that. I mean, if Trump voters, and I'm not talking about the lunatics, the conspiracy theorists, the crazy people. I'm talking about the average guy in the street, Joe Sixpack, who's voting for Trump.
Yeah.
He's not voting for Trump because he likes Trump's policies. He's voting for Trump because for him, Trump represents stability. He doesn't trust left-wing Democrats. He may or may not trust Trump, but he certainly distrusts the people on the left more.
Yeah.
And, seeing all these black faces on commercials and on TV is upsetting him. He doesn't realize it, but that's really getting to him. America's becoming a brown country. That's getting to him. All the stuff about LGBTQ, whatever, is confusing. And Trump makes him feel more secure, that this is the life he knows and wants. And it's a purely emotional reaction when you get right down to it.
Yeah, and to your point, three guys I know that will not be voting for Kamala Harris have all said, I'm not voting for a woman. I'm not going to say who it is, but three different guys have said it out loud to me, because we have these conversations. She's a woman. That's why that's what it comes to. I am not voting for a woman. So that's still out there. That's still a thing. I mean, to your point about policy, at the end of the day, we have to keep in mind what's actually going to decide this election. And it's arguably 7 swing states and certain people in those 7 swing states. So who are they, and what is going to motivate them, number one, to get out and vote, and number two, how they're going to end up making their decision. It's not, those people are not, it's not based on, what Antony Blinken's policy with regard to, the Eastern European bloc of NATO, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do, I think to your point, it has to do with security and trust. Do they trust who's going to be in office, that they're going to maintain that things aren't going to go haywire, basically?
Do you remember 2012? The biggest voting bloc that anybody talked about was soccer moms.
Well,
What happened to those soccer moms? Did they all?
2008 with Sarah. That was 2008 with Sarah Palin. Yeah, and then it was still a thing in 2012. No, but soccer moms are still a thing, Dad. Soccer moms. So soccer moms.
The other ones are going to decide the election is the soccer. I think that
They are because pre-debate when Biden was still in, my friends, those soccer moms in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, probably the biggest swing state, the most important swing state. They were either in a swing district, they were either not going to go vote, or a couple of them were even leaning towards Trump, especially after that picture of him with the fist in the air and the fight, fight, fight. They were warming to the idea of the possibility. Now, most of them weren't going to vote. I've stayed in touch with a lot of them, and they're genuinely excited. Like they're not as plugged in as me or you, so they heard the news that Biden dropped out. That caught their attention. I visited with a bunch of them after I saw you after the debate, and that's when they were, really depressed. They were just not into the election and what was going to be happening. Certainly not into voting for Biden. But having stayed in touch with a bunch of them after Harris was announced, some of them have, paid close enough attention to learn about Tim Walz. All they know is he's a 24-year volunteered for the military, at 17, stayed in, voluntarily for 24 years. He was a teacher and a coach. They like what they see. They like what they hear. Some of them even listened to Kamala Harris's speech last Thursday night at the end of the DNC. But there's genuine excitement. The other thing too, though, is it's not just the soccer moms in Bucks County. It's also the core voters in Philadelphia. And the turnout is really important. So, I mean, based on the turnout, Harris was going to win the county around is it Philadelphia County too? I know it's Philadelphia City, obviously, but is that the county? Either way, the surrounding areas of Philadelphia, Harris was going to win regardless of the turnout. But you have to also, Mike Madrid has pointed this out, you have to also maximize that turnout. And if there's not just a ton of enthusiasm about the candidate, you're not going to do one of the most basic things. So
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that was pretty much it. So those two things. Madrid also talks about key constituencies like the Latino vote. And
what's he predicting? Because I really respect Madrid.
So Mike, he's not making a hard prediction other than it's still a tight race. He hit most of his commentary about what he's been seeing out of the Harris campaign, in particular, the ads that are targeted towards Latino voters in key areas. In Arizona, are they going more the way that the Democratic Senate candidate has gone? I forgot his name, the fellow who brought out the other Democratic veterans in Congress, who's running.
Gallego, is that his name?
Yeah, Gallego, Ruben Gallegos. He was running circles around Kari Lake in Arizona. What? Pete Hamill? Pete Hamill. There you go.
That's how a 77-year-old mind works. It takes about 15, 20 minutes.
That's funny. But Gallegos, he has a different way that he's talking about the border. He's much more of a hawk on border security. He still talks about immigration reform, but it's a secondary issue, if not a tertiary issue. Madrid has been saying that her communication, her advertising, her campaign, her communications on being a hawk about border security and speaking to Latinos, not as if they're first generation immigrants, but as the largest voting bloc are second, third, and fourth generation Latinos, who are more optimistic about the future of the country, who have certain values and mores that neither party has really been speaking to, but he's been very, very bullish and optimistic about how he's having fun with it, because his book came out in June, and he said, they must have read my book. This is really exciting. He's very excited about how targeted they are, how much they've studied that constituency and speaking directly to them around the core values that speak most directly to them. So he seems pretty optimistic at this point, but I want to get him back on the show to see how his thinking has evolved, because he was actually one of the people that was saying, no, don't, you people who are trying to force Biden out of the election, you're not doing yourself any favors. The fundamentals were all there for Biden to have a much better election than the polls are showing. So I'm curious to see how his evolved.
But the image of Biden stumbling the way he did and being in cognitive decline was cemented during that debate.
Yeah.
And I don't think anything could have overcome that.
No.
I think one of the most uncovered stories of this election cycle is the economic impact a mass deportation would have.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think, and when look, I don't know, I do know about you, but I don't know about the people listening. When every Italian restaurant I go to, the cooks and more than half the staff are from Central America.
Yeah.
Every tradesman, I'd say like 8 out of 10 tradesmen that I do business with now for my 2 homes are Latinos. You look around, who's cutting your grass? I mean, if we, to say nothing of farm labor and stuff like that, I mean, the economic impact of deporting illegal aliens in this country who have become part and parcel of our economy would be devastating.
That's interesting. I haven't really thought that through because I just I don't give a lot of credence to that actually happening. I mean, we have to.
But that's a policy Trump came out and announced over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And whether he does it or not, he certainly should be held accountable for the economic impact it would have.
I think we should put you in the press pool at his next press conference, and you should ask that question. To see how he responds. He'll probably talk about Hannibal Lecter and sharks and getting electrocuted. And
the other thing I learned from Michael Ferrantino, a guy that I relate to, on a friend.
Yeah.
He was on the show.
He was very early on. Yeah. Brilliant guy.
Retired economist for the World Bank.
Yeah.
Very, very bright guy. He pointed something out to me. He said, all of and he's not voting for Harris, by the way. So,
so he could have come on here and did he share that publicly on Facebook? Because I don't want to out the guy. Yeah.
All of Harris's programs basically require congressional approval, which is, you need 60 votes in the Senate. So getting congressional approval for these for $25,000 to new home buyers, that ain't going to happen, folks.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
but tariffs,
yeah.
A president can impose tariffs without Congress.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So now you take a look at the 2 policies. What will tariffs do to the economy?
They're essentially
talking
inflation.
About raising tariffs across the board to 10% and targeting countries with unfair trade practices to 20%. Well, to protect American workers and to raise lots of money. Well, Michael pointed something out very interesting. It can't do both. If it's raising lots of money, it means that we're importing all this goods and it's not creating jobs.
Okay.
Right? If it's creating jobs, we're not importing goods and we're not raising money. Okay. And add that to the fact that if you impose tariffs, imagine the inflation.
Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Somebody's paying for it. Whoever's ultimately the end use consumer is paying for it.
Right.
Yeah. There's a few things I want to start to wrap it up, but there's a few specific events over the last couple of months. So they did want to get your opinion about. So we talked about Biden dropping out and how you experienced that time. What do you think about each of the VP picks? The J.D. Vance pick, the Tim Walz pick.
I like the Walz pick. In fact, I predicted it about 2 weeks before it happened, and they all said I was crazy.
So you were you rooting for the Walz pick over like a Josh Shapiro?
Yes.
Why? That's interesting. I was rooting for our Landsman, the Jewish guy.
I was rooting exactly for the other. If we had a white WASP at the head of the ticket, I would have loved to see Shapiro.
Okay.
But I think, like I said, I think the election is all about emotion, an emotional response to a ticket. And I don't think America's ready for a black South Asian woman and a Jew leading their country.
I mean, that's fair, but my thought is somebody who's not going to vote for a black South Asian woman for president is already not voting for her, whether she picks a Pete Buttigieg or a Josh Shapiro or another woman like Gretchen Whitmer.
I disagree. I think picking a white WASP male,
A football coach, a soldier,
all that stuff, at least on a subliminal level, is very reassuring to people.
Yeah.
And I think once, and Walz has a record. When he was a congressman, he was bipartisan. He reached across the aisle, did a lot of stuff with people, with Republicans.
Right.
Focused on veterans issues, farm issues, typical Republican issues.
Yeah.
As a governor, became what he really is, a left-wing Democrat.
So I dispute that a little bit, by the way.
Okay.
His first term, he had a divided legislature. The state legislature was divided. It wasn't until the last 2 years in his second term that the Democrats took over both houses of the legislature. I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure Minnesota was one of those in the 2022 election that went all blue. That's when he signed into law all of this, left of center and further left pieces of legislation. So his the label that he's some left wing guy. Most of his career in the House and then his first term as governor was pretty centrist, pretty pragmatic, problem solving centrist. It wasn't until he had a fully Democratic state legislature that he started signing more left wing bills.
He also brings to the table the ability to do a lot of pep talks.
Yeah.
And campaign speeches are really pep talks.
Oh, so okay. So
I love the energy he brings to the campaign.
Great energy, just genuine. I love the way his kids looked at him. That effusive tears in his eyes. That's my dad. As somebody said, when they saw the reaction of his kids at the beginning of his speech, when he was addressing them, he said, if your kids react to you in that way, you've won at life. So there's a lot that I was initially very sour about her picking Walz instead of Shapiro, but he's won me over. He's definitely won me over. The more I've heard him speak, the more I've learned about his background. I'm definitely, and again, listen, probably a lot of things that I disagree with him policy by policy, but I'll take a decent human being, that I trust, that I admire his background, that I'm going to have policy differences with over the alternative all day. What do you think are some of the stronger arguments against the possibility of Harris as president?
If Harris was running against somebody else, I could list 20, 30. But running against Trump, I don't see any downside.
Well, let me ask.
I think, if a Rock ran against Trump, I would vote for The Rock.
Well, let me ask it this way. What are some of the stronger arguments or weaker arguments that you've heard from some of the folks that you speak with, whether it's online or at shul or just in other walks of life, some of the stronger arguments against Harris that you've heard and some of the weaker ones?
We have no idea the level of support she'll give to Israel. We just don't know.
Well,
she doesn't have a record on it.
She laid out a couple of things in her speech that at least give an indication. Now you could say you don't trust her or whatever, but all signs based on her.
It's easy to come out and make general statements about I'm all for security of Israel. It's something else. What really matters is how much weapons they're willing to sell and give to Israel and when. Mm-hmm. That's what it comes down to. Specifics.
Yeah.
So I don't. That's something I worry about. I think that's a legitimate concern for my Jewish friends who are Trump supporters.
Okay.
I think that's a reasonable worry. The other thing that really scares the shit out of me from both candidates, I think your kids are going to be in big trouble if we don't do something with the debt crisis. We have to stop spending more money than we take in, and is committed as I am to, social safety net programs, social, education, all that other stuff. I would rather vote for somebody who has those as aspirations and won't implement anything until they know how they can pay for it.
Okay.
I think national security is really, really important. I think keeping the sea lanes open is essential for the world's economy, and only one power in the world can do that, and that's us. And that kind of scares me a little bit. I read an article a couple of weeks ago about how poorly the Navy vessels are being maintained.
Oh.
That something like half of our fleet is not only in the yard being fixed, but they won't fix them in Korea or Japan in shipyards that are really excellent and do great work. They have to bring them back to America, and that concerns me. I think we've gotten kind of weak on maintenance and updating the systems that we have. And that scares me. So anyway, those are the issues that I'm, need the candidates addressing.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do what professionals just won't do, which is rank prognostication. Where do you see things going over the next 2+ months?
I think barring some kind of unpredictable cataclysmic event or series of events, I think Harris and Walz are going to win. I think they're going to win big, much bigger than anybody thinks.
Why do you say that? The polls are indicating a very tight race.
Because all the trend lines are going in the direction that they need to for Harris and Walz. I read an article this morning that broke that down. And yeah, in all 7 swing states, I think Harris is up by a little bit in 4 and Trump's up by a little bit in 3. But they're all within the margin of error. But if you look down ballot, the Democrats,
Arizona's a great example. Ruben Gallegos is beating Kari Lake by about 15 points.
Yeah, and you can, and that's Bob Casey is they thought that race would be a close race, and seems to be running away with maybe not running away with the race, but he's in a pretty solid situation now.
And the governor's race in North Carolina. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. Right. The governor race in North Carolina. That guy's a lunatic. The Republicans put up.
He's just nuts.
He's
weird.
You scratch your head and you say, "Where do they come up with these people?" Yeah. Anyway, but if one of the things that you taught me to look at is where can a candidate's support grow? I think Trump has a ceiling that he's already reached. He's leading in all the swing states with white male voters.
Right.
Okay. Harris, in almost all of the states, I think in every one of them except Arizona, is leading among women, young people,
right,
minorities. These are the demographics that don't vote as predictably and as often as old white Jewish men do, like me. And she has the opportunity to grow support in all of these areas.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I think all the trend lines are working toward Harris-Walz and away from Trump. And I think, like I said, look, something horrible can happen, right? Putin could drop a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. Something horrible. The Middle East can explode. All these things can happen, which would change everything. But if everything remains on track the way it is now, I think Harris-Walz will win with like 50% of the popular vote and run away with the Electoral College. Absolutely run away with it. And I think the House will flip, and I think the Senate will be a nail biter.
Yeah,
If
it'll be within one or two
flip the
seats.
Senate, it'll be by 1 or 2 seats, period.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I largely agree with your thoughts on that. I do want to see what happens. There's certain benchmarks that we know could change things depending on what happens with the debate. If there's a second debate, I think 90% chance that whether it's one debate, two debates, or more, a VP debate is going to 90% chance it's going to be a Rorschach test. Whoever's rooting for Trump thinks Trump wins, and vice versa, or the VP debate the same. But there's a 10% chance that something crazy could happen, and it could really continue to influence the trend lines, as you say, which I think is the best way to look at polls, not at individual polls, but as where are they moving, what direction are they headed. Let me ask you a couple more questions and we'll wrap it up. One is the TP&R question. What do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, get their news from different sources than we do. How do we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other? Or is it even possible?
Something that I would like to do better is when someone disagrees with me, what articulates a point of view that I react negatively to, instead of debating someone, ask them questions. Not snarky questions, not questions that are really statements.
Yeah.
But ask sincere questions. 30% of the people you're not going to be able to get along with no matter what. But I think there's a good chunk of people in the middle. I mean, I have friends who are Trump people, and if we talk specific issues, I have a good friend that in California, a retired physician, Trump supporter, big on Israel. When we talk about specific issues like healthcare,
yeah,
we generally agree with each other.
Interesting.
We talk about fiscal responsibility. We generally agree with each other. I think there is hope, and I think, we'll see what happens in the election.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. Do you have any questions for me?
Do I have any question? Have you heard from Sav lately? No, I'm teasing.
Yeah. Actually, Savannah talked to Lisa last night. I was already sleeping, I think. But yeah, we talked to our kids.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, to your point, I should have responded before I asked you if you have any questions for me. This conversation I was having last night, there was one moment where, a lot of times I'll reflect back on a conversation. I'll think, okay, what could I have done better there? How could I have made it a more engaging, more nurture the relationship, learned more, opened it up to the possibility that maybe, piqued some curiosity in the person I was talking to. And this happens often where somebody will bring something up that they're really, really passionate about. In this case, one of his top issues was, what are they going to do about China? And it just hasn't been a subject that has come up in a lot of these conversations. But for this guy, very, very, to him, it was, at the top of his list, at least in the top 2 or 3, if not the very top issue for him. He does not believe that Kamala Harris is going to be tough enough on China. And that's our biggest threat over the next, 4, 5, 10 years. So I did say, look, this is not, there are some issues that I look at deeply and have a very deep working knowledge of that I could talk to you about. That's not one of them. I did share, my thoughts. One area that touched upon it for me was I thought, the CHIPS Act that Biden signed into law, that was a bipartisan, one of the big, about a half a dozen pieces of bipartisan legislation, did affect us in a very positive way, where we basically repatriated tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs due to the CHIPS Act. But other than that, it's not something I thought about. I think the way I could have responded differently, as opposed to finding one thing I knew a little bit about and sort of contest his point, was to say, look, that's not high on my list, but clearly you're very passionate about it. Why is it so? Does that take such prominence for you? Why is it important to you? And then it opens the person I'm talking to up to, well, here's why it's important to me, or maybe tell me a story about himself and when he started thinking about it. And, and I think that's a much more productive way to engage with somebody as opposed to keeping it all in terms of a contest or a debate style of conversation. So I think you make a really good point there. So I'll give you another shot. Do you have any questions for me?
Do you think the Mets will make the playoffs?
Well, you asked me at the wrong time, because last night it was a bad night. Our closer really blew a big one. But here's how I think about it. Yes and no. Look, diehard Mets fans went into the season, if you're paying attention, with open eyes about what the season was all about. We weren't going into the season. It wasn't a sell-off season. It wasn't a garbage season. It wasn't one where you're hoping that they lose 110 games. It was one where you hope that they're competitive enough to be rooting for something in August and September, which we still have something to root for, but it's also a year to build upon. It's a first year with Stearns as the GM. This year wasn't going to be our World Series year, but is Stearns rebuilding the minor leagues? Do we see continued development in some of the young players? What are some of the moves that they made to strengthen the bullpen and, help us look a year, 2 years, 3 years, into the future and say, yeah, this is going to be a competitive team for, the next 3 to 5 years. So that's the season that we got. They're still competitive in June and throughout most of July. They were really crushing it. So I was happy about that. August, they've been, closer to what they really are, which is a 500 team. So let's see if they can go on a nice run in September. Maybe they'll squeak one out and get into the playoffs. Either way, I don't think they're going too far in the play. They just don't have, they have a rotation filled with, at best, number 2 starters. Most of them are 3 or 4 starters, and the bullpen still has some holes in it. I think, what's his name? The closer, he's going to be a hell of a lot better next year. Remember, this is his first year back from a pretty catastrophic injury. Next year, he's going to be a hell of a lot better.
How old is he?
I think he's 29. He's still on the young side.
So he's still in his physical prime.
Yeah. So
anyway, I want to put something out there.
Okay.
That's not really a prediction, but it's less than a fantasy.
Okay.
Imagine for a second that the trend lines continue, and by October 1st or October 15th, it's pretty clear that Trump's going to lose in a landslide. Such a big landslide that all of his machinations and bullshit can't possibly pull the rabbit out of the hat. And Trump quits. Comes up with some bullshit medical reason, like his bone spurs are acting up again.
Or maybe the bullet, I don't know, something about it's a brain worm. Yeah, when he hugged Robert Kennedy Jr., the brain worm crawled into his brain through the ear, and now he's got a.
And he quits the race and announces to the American public this is the greatest travesty in the entire history of the world since the flood.
Okay.
So, if the polls show that he's really losing that big, I predict he will drop out of the race.
Oh, that's interesting. I can't. That's it. Nothing would surprise me at this point, but maybe that would surprise me. I don't see him. Yeah. I mean, I see your thing. So I see your logic behind that, because the last thing a narcissist at like that level of psychotic level of narcissism would want to do is put themselves in a position to be humiliated at that grand of a scale. You could see that he's like losing his shit just at being called weird, and one of the strategies that I think's working really well is a lot of Democrats, by and large, are deciding, you know what, mockery works against an authoritarian, against a world-class bully like that. Mocking really works. So you see how much he's losing his shit just by being called weird. If he is looking at, just like somehow, but doing it there has to be some way of doing it in a uniquely Trumpian way where he looks like he tries to spin the story as if he's really the winner and this is what winners do. Kind of like the way he fires people. He doesn't really fire people. He tweets something that intimates the possibility that he's firing them, and then they quit, and he says, I fired them after the fact, because he doesn't really have the balls to actually look them in the eye and fire them. There's some sort of Trumpian way that would happen. I'm just trying to imagine. I got to call some of my screenwriter friends, maybe Rich Tanny. We can ask him, what would that look like? Write that script for us. What would that? Anyway, that's interesting. I'll have to give that some thought. We'll see how it plays out.
Yep.
All right. Well, I appreciate you doing this, Pops. It's always nice catching up with you. Send love to Mom, and thanks for taking the time.
Love to the family. Love you. Looking
Absolutely.
good.
Yeah.
And I want to announce to the world that's listening to this how proud I am of what my son Corey has built over the last 3 years. Back in the day when I was co-hosting with you,
right?
Never in a million years did I think you'd have a podcast with David Brooks and Adam Kissinger and the Roush guy.
Did you listen to the Ann Applebaum?
I see on television.
Yeah, you got to listen to. I think you'd really like the Ann Applebaum episode, Dad. And if you haven't read her book, it's a really important. She's a brilliant historian, and she has a way of distilling what's actually happening in the world right now in a historical context. Brilliant person. But,
so when I come to California, I'll borrow your copy of the book.
I don't lend books. You should know this. I will buy you a book. I don't lend my books. I like my books. So yeah. Plus, I'm sure Anne needs the 10 cents that she'll get from selling another book. Anyway, as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow this show, write the review. Now you join the conversation on Patreon. It's patreon.com/politicsandreligion. Check it out. Get some TP&R swag. Really excited about that. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.